a pretty simple Photoshop tutorial that always raises a few eyebrows. It's creating this color vortex that you see right in front of you. There's actually only 5 steps needed in order to reproduce this effect exactly how you see it in front of you, with a 6th step that I've optionally applied that just adds a little bit of texture to the whole thing. So I want to dive right into this and show you how it's done. The very first step is to create the actual canvas we're going to work with. So you can go to File, New to create it. If you're using a Mac, you can hit Command-N to arrive at this window, and if you're using Windows, you can hit Control-N. Basically what we want to do is create a square canvas. The width that I've chosen for this tutorial is 500 by 500, which I've found to be the best, but you can deviate 100 pixels in either direction with very little consequence. Make sure the resolution is set to 72, which is the screen standard, and that the color mode is RGB for absolute best results. Once this is done, you can hit OK, and we have our new canvas right in front of us. Step 2 is a two-parter, but they're both easy. One is renaming the background layer. I always do this because I don't like any locked layers, and I like to be able to move things around and do what I want with them. So in order to rename it, very simple, just double-click on the name, and instead of background, let's just go with BG. You can actually rename it background, but I'm lazy and I like to do the BG. Once that's done, the second part of step 2 is just to fill the canvas black. In order to do this, you want to make sure your paint bucket tool is selected and your foreground color is black. Once that's set up properly, just click anywhere on the canvas and boom, it becomes black. Step 3 is adding the lens flares that will actually act as the color vortex foundation. It might sound a little strange to do this with lens flares, but once you see the effect, you'll understand how I arrived at it. What you want to do is go up to Filter, Render, Lens Flare. Depending on your version of Photoshop, you may or may not have the brightness slider that's featured in here, but you'll always be able to select your lens type, and that's the most important part. Movie Prime is the lens type that we're going to be using in terms of our flare. It has a source of light and then a lot of lines that come off of it in a lot of different directions, which will in essence become the swirls once we apply a filter or two to it. So what we want to do is line these up in a kind of triangular pattern. What you do is you click on the crosshair right on the source of light and you're able to drag it around the document. So I'm actually just going to leave that one kind of right where it was. Hit OK. Then we go to Filter again, Render, Lens Flare, and we'll create another one right up here, and I'm going to make this one 150. Hit OK. One more. I like to use at least 3 of these for the best effect. Put this right here. Feel free to use more and experiment with more. I've gone up to 5 and created some really interesting things with this technique and tutorial. Step 4 is adding the polar coordinates, which will actually turn this into the swirl itself. To do this, we go to Filter, then Distort, and then select Polar Coordinates. Make sure the first option that we have here, Rectangular to Polar, is selected, and then simply hit OK. There you see we have our swirl already in place, ready to be colored in. The 5th step in order to make this thing really come to life is just to add a layer style to it. And the layer style we want to add is the gradient overlay, which can be found right over here. Make sure that in your layers palette, the BG or background layer is selected and drop down to the FX button down here. Click once, find gradient overlay, and select it. You'll see that we get a whole gradient overlay that really kind of ruins what we've worked for, but don't worry, it'll come right back. What we want to do is select the arrow next to the gradients, so it drops down the list of available gradients to us, and select one of the spectrum ones down here. There's transparent rainbow and then there's spectrum. I tend to go for spectrum because it has a lot of red, and red always looks good backed on black. Alright, and we see that that spectrum has appeared. One last step will get us our color swirl. We want to switch the blend mode from normal to overlay. And there is our color swirl. You can fine tune this a little bit if you want by actually clicking anywhere on the image right here, holding it, and then dragging up and down. And you'll see that you're actually able to move the gradient in the background over your vortex. I've always really liked the red, green, blue type thing. You can also change the angle of the gradient, which changes which direction it comes from and where it's going to. If you change it to 180, it's going left to right, so you would drag it this way. And the same is true as if you went negative 180 or negative 90. It's just up to down, left to right. Once you've found one that you're happy with, just hit OK. At this point I would say you're done, but for those of you who want to do a little bit more with your design, here's just one extra step that adds a little bit of texture and kind of pushes the design over the top. What you want to do is right-click on the FX featured right over here, and you'll be presented with this list. What we want to do is create layer, which will take the layer style and actually create it as a separate layer that lives over top of the background. Once this is done, select that layer and go to Filter, Noise, and add some noise to this thing. You'll see right over here it adds quite a little bit of texture to it, and depending on your personal preference you can adjust the noise options. For the purposes of this tutorial I've gone with Gaussian and monochromatic for what I think are the best results. The amount varies on your taste, but once you start raising it too much, you actually lose all color data. See, if you go up to about 18, it'll be real pixely. Once you get up around here to like 200%, we're back to our original lens flare because all of the color data has been pretty much noised away. I'm thinking that probably 4 or maybe 6 looks really good. Once you're finished with that, adjusting the noise, if you wanted to do it, simply hit OK and you're ready to go. You can transplant this onto a business card or into a website fairly easily, and that is how to create the color vortex.